Welcome back to the new Unit 6. We've got arrays coming up on this unit, so we're going to talk about creation of arrays and how to access and change a few elements inside of it. So arrays are pretty awesome. They are a single variable that can actually carry several different items inside of them. The one thing is that we have to recognize that these all items have to be of the same data type. So we can make an array of integer data, we can make an array of objects. It doesn't really matter which kind we use. We'll find out later on that some types of arrays or lists can only hold specific data types. But again, this one can hold any primitive data type and any object reference, pretty much anything we can think of. They also do have a fixed size when they are initialized and created, so we cannot add elements to them or erase elements from them. And the size of the array is actually accessed using the length variable. Slightly different though than what we utilize for strings. I just wanted to clarify what we use here. So for the string class, if we wanted to create an example of a string A equals test, we would oftentimes find out the length of this by creating some sort of an integer length A, and we'd say A.length. Now, the one thing I want to point out here, and especially what we see here, is the parentheses at the end. And this is because strings can technically change size, so at any moment we have to find out what the current length of this is. If we build an array, though, later on, we will find out that the arrays do not use the parentheses. They actually only have the length here. And what I'm going to do here is create an integer array. We'll see how to do this literally in 2 slides. But let's say I have this array, its name or its reference variable is B, and I can again find out what the length of this is. Length of B is going to be taking B.length. And that's it. We do not use those parentheses again at all. And the main reason for that is because, again, once we have our array created, it cannot change size. So this variable that we have, change size. The variable that we have here is initialized once the array is actually created, and it's a constant. So it's something that can't be changed once it is actually instantiated. So the creation of the array itself, it's an object, so we're going to have to utilize something of the new class. Down below this, you can see what we have here. We're initializing an array of 10 integers. A couple of things to take a look at. The data type of the array is definitely going to be the first thing that you point out. So we have our data type. But then we see these weird little curlies. I'm going to start color coordinating these for you. They're not even curlies, they're actually technically the hard brackets, but this indicates that we are going to have some sort of an array of integers. We then have the reference variable name itself. This is pretty standard. Just make sure it starts with lowercase letters. Usually we would like to indicate that the name of the variable kind of indicates what we have inside of it, so this would be some sort of an array of values. We always have the keyword new as well. But then again, you'll notice that this line of code does show up here. This is initializing your array of the size that we see here. So if we look at this, we're going to need to use the hard brackets again and indicate that this is an integer that has a size 10 array. So it's pretty standard. Doesn't matter what kind of data type you utilize. You can exchange anything you want to right here. As long as those data types match, we should be good to go. And then also don't forget your brackets. I think those are the number one things people forget. So one thing to remember, though, with all of this going on is that when you build an array, technically you've instantiated the array, but the values inside of the array have not been really built yet. So this is where a lot of our things are going to be kind of taking on their default values. With integers, we know that integers are going to default to what we call the value 0. But there are other things that we should look at. We can make an array of Boolean values. Don't forget that Boolean values do default to a false statement. We can technically also take any primitive data type, I guess. Well, no, numbers will always go to 0 no matter what those are. And then the other one we also have is some sort of an object reference. So if we're making strings or we're making dogs or we're making players, these always do start off as something that we call null. And that'll kind of rear its head a little bit later on in these notes as well. So to create an array, we also can do this in a way we do similar to variables, in which we declare that we have some sort of an array first, and then don't necessarily initialize it right away. Sometime later in the constructor, when we get some data on there, maybe how long the array we want it to be, we can go ahead and initialize it to be its correct size. So again, very similar to everything else, these arrays are objects, so they will actually technically start off as the null values that we see here. Very common, just like we have for instance variables, is how we build arrays. Sometimes they're instantiated as instance variables, sometimes they're just local variables inside of a loop to help us complete some sort of a task. The initializer list is another way to create a list or an array if we know the data that we want inside of it right away. And you'll notice that the beginning of this looks exactly the same as what we had before. We're initializing some sort of, not so color coordinated this time, but the data type we have is again integers. We are indicating that this means that this is an array of some sort. We've got a name for them. And then on the right-hand side, this here is what we call the initializer list. Notice that this uses curly braces instead of the hard brackets. And then what we have is we have elements inside of here that are all separated by the commas. The commas are 100% necessary. The data types inside of them all have to match as well. So you can't just randomly throw in a double in there. They all have to be integers because we are making an array of integers here. So this would create an array. The elements in there are 9, 10, 11, and 12 in that specific order. It's a really nice thing to do. There's only one really specific rule here, and that is that if you try to use an initializer list after declaring a variable, so for instance, if we had put a semicolon here and written all of this stuff on the next line here, that would have caused an error actually. It does have to all happen on and occur on the same exact line. Let's describe what's happening really quickly here with a couple things. I'm going to switch up to pink. So if we look at this first line that we have, this is just going to be, say that we're declaring that we have an array of integers. We don't know how long this array is going to be. It's not even actually built yet. It's just necessarily declared. This next line, we are going to initialize this. Oh man, this is where my spelling sucks. I think there's 1 N. The size of this is going to be what we notice inside the brackets. So of size 5. Remember, technically something to think about right here. All values are 0 at this point in time. So when we build an array, they all take on their default values. Underneath this, you will notice that we are also using some sort of an initializer list. So we are creating some sort of an array right away called your nums. And again, this is going to be built having values inside of it, size of 5. Each of those elements will be 3, 6, 11, 24, and 76 accordingly. You can also see here we do something extremely similar with just a different kind of data type for you guys, showing that it doesn't matter what we use as long as you have string variables here and each of your data types inside of the array itself or the initializer list are strings, you should be good to go. It's kind of nice. Accessing and editing the array entries, this is a big one. So if we look at what we have down here, I've created some sort of an initializer list of some integer variables, and I want to access something from this. Be careful, very relative to what strings are, the indices of these are going to start at 0. So we're going to run into that issue again where the length of this is going to give me a value of 5. You'll notice that 5 is not a valid index. So just be something to watch out for. This will kind of show up in the notes later on as well. When we go to access our array, we just kind of give you the name of the array itself or the reference variable that we are trying to utilize. You also will give me what index inside of here that you would like to visit. So index 2 would come through, say, congratulations, I'm grabbing the number 6. That variable 6 would then be stored inside this integer that we have as num. Please make sure that the data types of these will match up. You will run into either a compile time error or an error that breaks your program if those two data types do not match up. To edit an array element, this is a pretty fun one where we want to change something inside of it. Again, I always think of this with an equal sign where you have two halves of the problem. The left side is always what you want to change or what you are changing. And then the right-hand side is always what you're changing it to. So what we're realistically doing here is we are grabbing onto index number 1, and we are saying whatever value is there, I want to turn that into the value of 6. So if we look at my array, technically index number 1, I'm going to use my cool little eraser. Oh, actually, guys, learned this trick. we can just make a really big white mark. Look at that. Come on back down. We have just changed this to also be the number 6. So this is the new value of my nums after this line of code would be ran. Last little stuff that we're doing, describe a couple of lines of code that we have here. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. So here we're using, again, an initializer list. To build an array of size 4. We are printing out some sort of an element here. If you recognize that the index is index number 1, just don't forget that we are labeling our indices from 0. So this would give us a value of 10 back. We then go through and actually change the array itself. So if we're going to kind of draw the array here, my values would be 9, 10, and then we changed index 2 to be the number 5, and we would then have 12. Take note of this, I guess I want to mention this. The initializer list does use the curly braces, but when we do draw out arrays, we utilize those hard brackets. The curly braces really are only used for that initializer list and then never again for arrays ever. If we then print out the value that we have at students of year 2, since we just changed that, that should print out the value of 5. And then finally, here's what we're going to run into. The length of my student years right now is 4. So we do count these, if we're counting lengthwise, from our counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That is just an atrocious 3 there. Holy cow. So if we look at this, we have a length of 4, which means my last value is going to be index 4. If I run through this, we are going to unfortunately run into an issue. I don't have an index number 4. What does this occur and what happens? These are called array index out of bounds exceptions. These are issues or errors that are happening while the program is running. Unfortunately, it's going to destroy the program, so they give you some sort of an error message. So anytime you see something along these lines of array index out of bounds or out of bounds in general, it's exactly what you mean. You went too far in one direction. Remember, negative indices don't exist. The length is technically 1 past the end for those indices as well. Other than this, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a whole bunch, but I'm leaving you with a nice little picture today. Ready for this? You're never going to guess what it is. Wait for it. Wait for it. I got a little doggo. Boom. All right. Happy Wednesday, guys. We'll see you Friday.